very warm welcome to this flagship youth conversation show across the African continent. Now, for many years, the youth have been termed the leaders of tomorrow. But one would wonder, why does it feel like the future leaders are being relegated to the side while major decisions are being taken on their behalf time and time again? Well, on this show, we will be addressing these issues and many more as it pertains to the youth across the African continent. We're talking about politics, policies, and the likes. My name is Blessings Mosugu. This is Fafanua Afrika. Now, November is tagged Africa Youth Month, and this year, the theme is breaking the barriers to meaningful youth participation. Young people are at the very heart of Africa's development agenda, with over 75% of Africa's 1.2 billion inhabitants under the age of 35 and 453 million Africans aged 15 to 35. Now, it goes without saying that the development outcomes of Africa's young people have a significant and lasting effect on the continent's trajectory. Now, the challenges Africa face in education, in employment, in health and governance are most acutely felt by Africa's youth. Now, with that said, let's take a look at what the youth have to say as of this moment.
The government have not actually put in place proper infrastructures for the youth to rely on. So it's more or less like we're just doing what we can afford to do to pull up strings for ourselves. Definitely 100, I can support that fact that youths are willing to make a change in the system.
I think the youths are willing to take opportunities, to take advantage of the opportunities if there were. But in cases of power, especially politics, there's like so much you can do if you are not given the opportunity. It ends up being if you know somebody or if you are from somewhere. And even when you know somebody, the people that are already in, they have the power and they have the money, and you almost cannot compete with that. So I think they need to be given an opportunity to showcase what they have in terms of politics. But in terms of business, you can't really say, oh, this person didn't give me a chance, because it's in your hands. You could just go into it and then make the best out of it. I just think the younger generation should be given more chance. I think we have, the world is evolving, and like we are the next generation, we are the next big thing, so we should be given the chance to put to work everything that we know.
There are rooms for youth to be there, but it's quite unfortunate that the leaders we have, they don't want them to be. They really want to be in that position to the point that they don't even want any youth, because we are in the Sorosoke generation. So we really do, the impact the youth will bring to the government will be different from what is there right now. Truly, we have to fight for it. The government will not give room, and the youth are really trying. I will give them kudos for it. They are really trying to the point that currently what is going on in my country, Nigeria currently, I know the youth are striving hard to get it and to take charge of everything. I really want a better Nigeria. So I would just urge my fellow youths to be also involved, because with us, we can have a better Nigeria and a bright future.
Our leaders, the elders are not giving the youth opportunity. At times, they don't want to leave the position they are, or they don't even want to. They are the one that, in fact, even if they put youth, they are the one to control youth. The youth are not that privileged. They are not given the privilege, the chance to do their things on their own, or to decide or to make decision on their own according to or in the organization, or either to improve in government or anything.
I can say before, youth want to participate in politics, but the fear in politics is a lot of youth see politics as dirty game. They see that when you get to politics, no, it's either do or die. They kill people, politics, all these elderly people that don't want to leave their position, they know how to do this. You know, a lot of youths lose interest. For example, me, I lose interest in politics. Though I'm reading political science, I'm reading about politics, but I lose interest in politics. Why? Because a lot of people see politics as dirty game. I'm not interested because it's dirty game. We are still seeing some youth that are supporting these elderly people. So a lot of people lose interest in politics as, but at least I cannot say all youths. We still see some youths that are outside there because I have a lot of friends that are outside there that they want to contest, they want to participate, they want to make impact in their own local governments.
Well, those were the words of the youth across the African continent. Some people say that some youths are willing, but politics to them is a dirty game. And some say that even though they're willing, they don't have the power and they don't have the resources. Now, joining me in the studio to discuss this is Ayodele Adio, the managing editor, the Avalon Daily, and a publisher of the Lekki Post. Thank you, Ayodele, for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Good afternoon. Good to have you here. It's a pleasure.
Same here.
So, Ayodele, you've seen what the youth had to say. You've heard their complaints. Would you say that you agree with them totally?
I mean, it would be unfair to discountenance their concerns and perhaps their experiences with African governments across the continent. But, I mean, politically, I would argue that young people have their destinies in their hands. And the reality is that young people haven't organized enough and leveraged on their numbers and their concerns enough to press through certain reforms in governance or in government in itself. What I would like to see is a situation where first young people understand that they do have the power and the number to determine who governs or who they decide to elect into office, political office in this regard. And once they realize that they have this power and can only leverage on that power if they organize around the issues that bothers them the most, then we can begin to see some sort of progress in terms of impact on the lives of young people, from policy or from politics at the end of the day. So I think it starts by realizing that young people have the potential to change the course of their lives, especially politically, because they have the numbers on their side. They have the youthful energy on their side. And quite frankly, they have been at the receiving end of poor governance and poor leadership over time. And so they have the motivation on their side to change things very quickly. And I think it starts by an awareness of this potential and a realization of this ability to change things for themselves.
Well, I mean, many people will say that even though they have the power, they have the number, they have the motivation, they still don't have the resources. And like one of them said in the Vox Pops, someone said that some people put the youth in power just to use them. So, I mean, is this not really complicated, seeing how some youth are actually interested in politics? You just mentioned that they've been on the receiving end for the longest time, and now they want to participate, but then they don't have the resources. It's either they're going there as, having godfathers, when we talk about godfatherism and all of that. So they don't exactly have the freedom or the independence. That's for those who even get to power. So what would you say about that?
You don't need resources to vote. And all you need to change governments is to vote. Listen, the problem is, I find that people think that the challenges that they face every day are challenges that come from God. And if they pray hard enough, they would overcome these challenges. And many don't realize that the reason that they are poor, the reason they are unemployed, the reason they don't have jobs is largely a failure of government and governance. And once they realize that their problem is not from God not answering their prayers, but the incompetent people that they've elected into office over time, and then perhaps they may begin to realize that if they vote differently, they could have a different outcome in their lives. I give a typical example. If you were 22 years old, leaving the university in 2015, when this new government came into power, you'll be 30 years old when they leave office next year. It means your best years would have been lived at a time of high inflation, economic stagnation, and an economy that has really not delivered anything to you. So your best years would have been gone, essentially. So my point is, you don't need resources to walk to your polling unit that is down your road to vote in your interest. It starts by realizing what your interest is. As students, for instance, your interest should be quality education. And if, for instance, a government has not paid adequate attention to your education, then you can punish them electorally. And I see that Africans or young people in Africa continue to make excuses for bad governance and continue to make excuses for poor leadership. And like I said, it's because they think that their progress and their breakthrough will come from God and not the people that they elect. And that's why we continue to excuse poor leadership. If we can realize and organize ourselves around our pain points, which are numerous: unemployment, poverty, bad infrastructure, almost a social collapse of values in our community, then we'll start electing people into office that will address these issues. We may not be able to achieve them overnight at all levels of government, but we certainly can begin to get it right at the local level, at state level, and gradually we'll get it right at the federal level. But I want to see young people have some sort of self-worth and dignity in themselves. That you cannot put me in this situation for 4 years and still have the temerity to demand my vote. I would rather vote for my interest than vote for you to perpetuate yourself in office and continue to govern poorly. So if young people have some sort of self-worth, dignity in themselves, and the realization that they have the power to elect those who govern them, and they realize that those who govern them will determine the course of their future, then maybe we're going to begin to see a different voting reality, high levels of participation in the electoral process, and possibly a better outcome in governance. Because as we speak, in Lagos, for instance, you have less than 20% registered voters who participate in the election cycle. For young people specifically, that number is less than 10%. So people below 30, 10% go out to vote on election day. Now that's an astonishingly low number. We need to raise those numbers. And for us to raise those numbers, we must make young people realize that their destinies are tied to those people that they elect, and not about how hard they pray.
I mean, talking about the statistics of youth that are going out to vote, if you compare the percentage now to what it used to be before, I think that we've recorded, huge success, or maybe not a total success, but we've seen records of youth coming out en masse to vote, and not just in Nigeria now, different African countries across Africa generally, they're coming out to vote, they're coming out to protest, and trying to put people that represent their own interests in power. So what would you say about that? Would you say, compared to what it used to be before, we're recording a level of success, and if it goes on progressively at this rate, we're going to see a drastic change?
To be honest, I think that there's been a downturn across the African continent. Young people took their destinies into their hands. It was young people that fought for independence in Nigeria, in Ghana, in South Africa, several countries. It was young people that were at the forefront of these struggles, and young people got into government in the 1960s and, essentially governed, these great countries across the continent. But what we have seen over time is that young people have grown increasingly disinterested in politics across many African countries. What we're hoping to see is that in the next electoral cycle, because what has happened, whether it's South Africa or Ghana or Nigeria, we've been governed by octogenarians that have plunged our countries into large scales of poverty and unemployment, where the young people are at the receiving end of these challenges. So what we want to see is that young people will get up again and take back their countries, whether it's Ghana, Nigeria, or South Africa, to say that this is not the kind of country that we prayed for. This is not the democracy that our fathers or our forefathers fought for. And we want better for ourselves. We want better for our children, and begin to fight for that better future by simply taking the pain to register to vote and waking up on election day and going out to cast a ballot, first primarily against bad leadership, and the rest will settle itself, because it starts by rejecting power performance. Like President Obasanjo always says, never reinforce failure. If we constantly reject poor leadership and bad governance, we will soon get it right. So the first thing young people need to do across the country is not to reward failure and to punish bad leaders who have put us in poverty and unemployment. And we do that by voting against those leaders across the continent. And I'm optimistic that a lot of young people will turn out to vote in the coming election cycle in Nigeria, Ghana, and South Africa and change course. Because we've seen it happen everywhere in the world, that when young people come out to vote in mass, they change electoral outcomes. They did it recently at the midterm elections in the United States because young people came out to vote. The president gave them cancellation of students' debt, and they rewarded them in the midterm elections. So young people also should look for the things or where their self-interest lie and come out and fight for their future. And all you have to do is queue up on election day and vote. It is not that hard, and we can begin to take our countries back.
Well, so if we're talking about the downward spiral, we've seen cases of people who are interested in voting. Some young people, let me use Nigeria as a case study. Some people are actually interested in voting, but looking, behind now, looking in retrospect, we see that several times when these election periods approach, there's always cases of insecurity, there's cases of, killings here and there, kidnappings and all of that. So some people will tell you that I'd rather sit in my house and not vote. So they want to elect a good leader that will represent their interest out there. But then the risks attached to it and then the dangers attached to it will hinder them from voting. That is just one of the many challenges that they face. So how would you say that youths can tackle these challenges?
I'm sorry, but I disagree that is not in the character of young people. Young people are usually risk takers. And just to on a lighter note, young people travel several states or several kilometers to go see their girlfriends in 4 or 5 states away. Go to campuses that they don't know, risk being beaten by cultists in another school and all of that. Young people go to clubs at the dead of the night. They drive convoys and travel to several states to go to parties at the end of the night. So young people are risk takers by nature, right? And so the idea that they are scared and they stay at home because they are afraid of something.
But looking at it from coming from a place where they have been demotivated.
So yes, that exactly is the problem. So I think that the problem is not so much about fear of coming out on election day. It's a case of they have not been inspired to go out and vote. So what needs to happen is that we need to be able to show young people and make the case directly to them that your future will be determined by the quality of people that you elect, not by how hard you pray. There's a problem in African continent where we think that our future is determined by how hard we pray. We have to be able to show young people that you're not going to be, listen, we have doctors in this country, professionals in this country, in Lagos State, who can afford to rent a house in the city center. They can afford to buy Tokumbo cars that are 2006 or 2007 models. How did we get to the point where professional doctors cannot put their heads above water, that they have to run across the country to get a decent living? So we need to make the case directly to these people, young doctors, young professionals, that wages in your country has stagnated for the last 15 years, that inflation is eating away every ounce of progress that you think that you're making, that the economy is not making you move up to middle class, but is rather drawing you below poverty level. And if you don't elect the right people into offices, your children are going to be in a worse condition than you are. You can't send your children to public schools, and private schools, the fees that are being charged by private schools will run you broke. So these are the direct cases that we need to make to young people to say that your life is tied directly to the quality of the people that you elect. And if we're able to make that connection, I guarantee you that they will go on the streets and they will queue up on election day and that they will vote. We saw what happened in Lekki in 2020. Because that police brutality directly affected these young people, they had friends who had been shot at by policemen. They have been slapped by policemen. Right. They have been harassed by policemen. So they didn't need a preacher to tell them to campaign against police brutality. So in that same way, we need to show young people that the outcomes of their lives will be determined by the quality of leadership that they elect. And hopefully that way, they will come out in their numbers and vote for a better future for themselves. And they won't need anybody, to deceive them otherwise. And I think that it starts by finding that button to motivate young people. We haven't found that yet, unfortunately. And that's the problem. That's why they're playing football on election day. That's why they're sitting at home on election day. That's why we're looking for people to bribe 5,000 naira to go and vote, because there's still a disconnect between what their aspirations are and what political leadership can offer. We have to find a point of convergence between those two, and that's the only way that we can get young people more involved in the electoral process. And that may need better or clever politicians who can articulate a bold and compelling vision that are authentic, that can speak to the issues, that don't carry a baggage of corruption, and they have a clear vision of where they want young people to go to, and the ability to eloquently communicate that vision and spark fire in the hearts of young people. And see, young people work hard every day in Lagos, spend hours in traffic, and they still go home in the evening and go and stand as ushers in church, as tired as they are. Why do they do that in church? Why do people on Sundays go through that traffic to Abeokuta Expressway to go to church on Sunday service? Why do young people between Kanu and Zaria, they walk hundreds of kilometers to go to a special mosque to pray? It's because that preacher in the church or in that mosque has inspired them to believe in something larger than themselves. So until we have politicians also that can speak to the giants within these young people, it's going to be a basket case, a continent of lost hope, a continent of lost potential. And we don't want that kind of thing to happen to Africa, where our best and brightest are leaving the continent in droves and leaving our continent in darkness. I hope that we have passionate politicians who are authentic, who speak to the issues, who will carry young people along. And I hope that there will be a lot of young people on the other side who will be willing to take their countries back, and then we could have a better continent.
I mean, very well said, Ayodele. And I would also like us to push up the issue of inspiration to a larger scale. So we've talked about young people voting. How about young people actually in politics? Now, you have said that sometimes, most times, what we see is the case of being demotivated, not exactly because they don't want to be actively participants. But then again, there is, I mean, recently there's been a spike of activities of young people on social media, and it's leading so many people to draw the conclusion that young people are not even ready for anything politics, policies, and the likes. Would you agree that young people are not mentally or physically prepared to rule? Because, I mean, like they always say, the youth are the leaders of tomorrow, but it seems like tomorrow is never approaching. So do you believe that the young people are not? It seems to be, I mean, you spoke about octogenarians ruling for the longest time. So there seems to be this breach, this huge gap between the older generation and the younger generation, and it's taking time to feel it. What do you think about that?
I'm not sure that there's any old person that can make the case that young people will do worse, because we've had leaders in 40 years who have not solved any social problem, who've not solved potable water, electricity problem, infrastructure. There's not a single social problem that's been solved in Nigeria in 40 years. What we've had, the numbers by the NBS yesterday shows that 133 million people have been plunged into poverty in Nigeria. The unemployment numbers are scary. We've had the highest level of food inflation since 2005, which is 17 years. So there is no metric by which you can make the case that young people don't have the capacity to govern when you have spectacularly failed, as, in quote, old people with the responsibility that has been thrusted onto you. What we need to do, however, is to prepare young people for leadership positions to do things differently. And I must argue that young people are already doing excellently well in several multinational companies. You walk into many multinationals, in fact, and you see young Nigerians in their late 20s, very early 30s in managerial positions, controlling people across continents and doing excellently well in these fields. You've seen what young people have done in the creative space, whether it's music, fashion, entertainment. They're doing excellently well in these spaces. So there is, it's a bit insulting to say that the young people who have created a pathway for themselves in the creative industry and in other spheres of life will suddenly become dumb or lack the capacity to do well in politics. But what we also need to do on our own part is to find centers or spaces or whatever it is that we need to do to invest in a pipeline of a leadership pipeline, if you may, where we can build and prepare leaders for the challenges of tomorrow, for the challenges that they are going to be confronted with. We need that leadership pipeline in our country because in the first instance, there is no mentorship. There's a huge gap. Young people are struggling to find credible mentors in the political space. So there's a huge lacuna. There are no mentors. So we need to bridge that gap, with institutes of learning, probably global exchanges or whatever we can do to be able to invest in young people, to be able to produce better leadership in different. And if we're able to make that investment, I can assure you, that would probably, churn out better leaders, going forward. What many of these people don't tell you is that in 1998, when there was about to be a transition to democratic rule, there were centers like the Carter Center in the United States of America. Several international agencies set up offices in Nigeria to organize workshops and trainings for a lot of these politicians who are about to take over government offices. A lot of trainings happened. The Carter Center, for instance, spent millions and millions of dollars training people on democracy and due process and governance and all of that. They did all of that for them in 98. So we need to replicate that and sustain it over a period of time, and perhaps even start it much earlier and try to catch Nigerians and Africans, much younger. I know there is an African Leadership Academy somewhere in South Africa. I read about it a couple of years ago, and I think they are doing excellently well trying to catch people young. We need to be able to do that, to catch people young, to prepare them, for the future, to prepare them to be leaders of their country, to instill in them that confidence, that belief, that knowledge, that experience, and more importantly, that network to be able to offer better than we are currently receiving, in Nigeria today. I think if we do that, we may be able to turn the tide in another 20 years from now.
Okay, Ayodele, one last question, and I would like for us to understand the concept of Africa Youth Month. We see that this month, November, is Africa Youth Month, and I want to have your input on that. So the Youth Month is basically creating awareness for the youth, just like you've rightly and extensively said. The youth need to know that it's time for them to take decisions in their own hands. So even if, the bulk of the work is on the people in politics right now and the youth are not getting access, but then voting people in power is where we can start from. So basically, the Africa Youth Month is just creating awareness. What do you think about this? I mean, several times, we've talked about the youth not knowing their rights, not knowing what they have to do. But then this is a platform, this is an initiative that creates this awareness for the youth. So what is your take on that?
I mean, I like and I appreciate, any effort that tends to add value to young people, because that's the only asset we have, across the continent. The young people are our biggest assets, and whatever investments we make in these young people, I always welcome, and I always appreciate those efforts. And I'd like to see, a lot more corporate organizations support some of these kinds of initiatives, whether it's in terms of skill exchange, in terms of internship, whatever corporate, non-governmental organizations, NGOs, the media, whatever people can do to make the best of this month for young people across the continent. I think it's always a welcome idea, and we need to have a more sustained engagement about the future of young people across this country, because I genuinely fear that we're pushing young people over the cliff. And if we don't push a reset button very, very quickly, we obviously are going to have a continent of chaos, of coups, of wars, the dark times of the early 1990s. And we don't want to go back to that time. And all young people are asking for are opportunities to thrive. And that's all we owe these people across the continent. And we hope that those in authority at the moment listen. And if they don't listen, we need to organize to ensure that young people elect better people into offices so that they can provide the opportunities that young people crave for to make the best for their lives, for their families, and of course for the continent, at large. And hopefully, if all hands can be on deck, if we roll our sleeves and work hard on it long enough, we probably will be able to deliver a continent that has had a promise of greatness for since the 1960s when we pushed out the British, and hopefully we could have El Dorado any time from now.
Most definitely. Thank you so much, Ayodele Adio. You have really extensively discussed this issue with us, and we're really grateful to have you on the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
My pleasure. Managing editor Ayodele Adio of the Avalon Dailies joining me for the first time on the show, and it was, spectacular. Thank you once again, Ayodele. Well, we'll be going on a quick break now, and when we come back, we'll be introducing our second guest, and also we'll share with you the reactions from the social media on Africa Youth Month. This is Fafanua Afrika. Stay with us.
News Central TV, Africa's #1 storyteller, has come with the best of both worlds. With a combination of news app and live TV, we ensure that you keep track of the latest headlines, breaking news, and in-depth analysis from professional journalists from around the continent. Download the News Central TV app on Android and iOS and get started today. Don't forget to follow us on News Central's social media platforms. News Central, Africa First.
Thank you for staying with us on Fafanua Afrika. We have been talking about how the government across Africa can unlock the massive potential of their greatest resources, and that is the teeming youthful population for sustainable development. I just had my guest, Ayodele Adio, who extensively discussed that with us, and we are grateful for. But right now, it's time to see the reactions from the people around social media. Like they say, the voice of the people matters. So we will see reactions from social media. All right, so the National Youth Council in Kenya says the energy and capability of Kenyan youth is unmatched. Now, they continue to play a key role in development. In Kenya, the NYC remains committed to breaking the barriers to meaningful youth participation and inclusion in governance through policy formation. Happy Africa Youth Day. Like we know, this month's theme is breaking the barriers to meaningful youth participation. So the NYC of Kenya says they're doing a good job to ensure that. Now, Kulamanifi Radio says, as we celebrate the African Youth Month, it is important for you to participate in electoral and political processes. Africa Youth Month 2022 themed Breaking the Barriers to Meaningful Youth Participation and Inclusion in Advocacy, hashtag DG Trends. Now, Michael Muta says, Happy Africa Youth Month 2022. I celebrate the power of young people throughout Africa while breaking the barriers to meaningful youth participation and inclusion in advocacy. And Joseph Mumba says, Happy Africa Youth Month 2022. From 1st to 30 November 2022, we celebrate the power of young people throughout the African continent. The theme of this year's Africa Youth Month is breaking the barriers to meaningful youth participation and inclusion in advocacy. That's according to Joseph Mumba. Oladile John Nihi says, Africa Youth Month 2022, be united towards the common goal of achieving a workable Africa. In commemoration of year 2022, Africa Youth Month, which traditionally kickstarts on every November 1st to celebrate and re-energize Africa youth all over AU member states, I, in a high spirit of ecstasy and jubilation, wishes to admonish African youth to be ambassadors of transformation and agents of positive integration for the Africa we all need to be actualized. True words. No better words have been said. And Kenya Malaria Youth Army says, Africa's greatest blessing is its youth. We are the essence of vitality and hope. We will define our continent's destiny. Hashtag Zero Malaria and all that. Well, those were reactions from Twitter, social media generally, celebrating the Africa Youth Month. Once again, Happy Africa Youth Month. Now, while we go further, joining me now to further talk about breaking the barriers of youth involvement in politics, policies, and the likes. I will be joined now by Linda Mzapi, a communications and public relations expert from South Africa. Hello, Linda. It's good to have you join us.
Thank you for having me, and a happy Youth Month.
Happy Youth Month to you too. My pleasure. Now, Linda, I will just go straight to it. We know that it's a no-brainer that one major platform in this generation is, of course, social media. I mean, I just read reactions from social media now regarding Africa Youth Month. It's amazing to see how social media connects people all over the world, their agendas, their interests, and the like. So, I mean, we've seen institutions and organizations finally embrace these media platforms. And that is what Africa Youth Month is doing this year, using the social media to move the agenda that they are now more actively involved in making sure the youth are participating in politics and issues that concerns the governing and decision makings so that they can also benefit from it. So I would like to ask you, what do you think about, first of all, Africa Youth Month as an agenda, because it is a revolution, making the youth more involved in politics now. What do you think about that initiative generally?
I think it is a very good initiative because tomorrow belongs to the youth. So when decisions are being made, these are decisions that are going to affect us in the next 30 years, 40 years, and we are the ones that are going to be there. So we also need to be there. So is there a seat for us, on the table, or we should bring our own chairs? Or do we need to start building our own tables because we need to be involved? This is directly affecting us. So we need to know that we matter. Yeah. So it's a very good agenda.
Okay, still talking about social media, I would also like to ask on the part of the youth. Now, we've seen several times when people complain about youth involvement in social media, and this is not about pushing agendas or anything. It's just youth trying to, the youth trying to have fun on social media. And so many people think that this is enough distraction to stop them from participating in anything involving politics. And some people have gone further to say that the youths are not ready. They're too, there's this woke generation. They're too playful on social media to even be interested in anything politics. And my guest earlier talked about that, and he says that is not excuse enough. So I want to know your own view on that. Do you think that the youth being involved in social media has anything at all to do with them being ready to govern?
To be really honest, we should note that, every new technology causes disruption in any culture, in any environment. So the youth have a voice, they have something to say, and they are not being given platforms. So what do? They run to social media. So it's a matter of saying to the youth, we want you included. We can mentor you. Come. And when that happens, the youth will begin to use social media more wisely because now they feel that they don't matter. And when people feel that they don't matter, what do? The feelings, they are emotional. So sometimes people are angry on social media because they're like, give us a voice, give us the mic. We have something to say. If you don't give us the mic, then we're going to shout. So it's really not an excuse. They should give us a voice, give us a chance, and they'll see that will turn social media into something that can be used for our greater good and for the greater good of the future and the coming generations that are to come.
Okay, Linda, there has also been a certain debate that youth in Africa are beginning to turn out en masse when it comes to politics, voting, and all of that. And I would like us to compare that to how it used to be before. I mean, it wasn't like this before. Now they want to be fully represented in politics. Anything that has to do with parties' representation, their voices need to be heard, and they're taking up this message more literally than they used to. So I would like to ask of your own position on this matter. Do you think, compared to what it used to be before, the youth are now more involved in politics? I mean, yeah, we can argue that the youth were the ones who fought for independence for, in time past, but at some point there was a lackadaisic attitude, and then the youth just kind of slept. There's this saying in the Yoruba in Nigeria that some people sleep and just turn to the same side. So it felt like for the longest time, the youths were just sleeping and then facing the same side. But now it feels like they are awake and they want to take back what belongs to them. Some people say it's not true, but others believe that, yes, the youth are actually more involved in recent times. What do you think about that?
I think I would agree with the statement because now there's more knowledge, about politics and youth are getting more and more involved in politics. But is it meaningful participation? I think that's the very important question. In as much as they're involved, in as much as they're going there, is it turning out to be fruitful? I think that's the very important question. Of course, we are joining in, all the agendas we're pushing, we're in politics, but it's not, turning out to be fruitful. So for me, I would call it change without change. I would call it change without change.
All right. Okay. I would also like to know, Linda, some people also complain that the youth are interested in governance. I mean, not just voting now, but actually being in politics. But there are certain challenges that they have faced. Do you know some of these challenges and can you share with us?
I think one of the challenge, honestly, is lack of self-confidence in the youth. And the lack of self-confidence is not even our fault. It is because the systems we have been raised like that to doubt ourselves. So when we are presented with some of these opportunities to go in, we don't go. We doubt ourselves. We do not think we are capable of leading because our minds have been channeled to be followers. To be sheep that follow the shepherd. So we do not believe in ourselves. We do not believe in ourselves, to be honest. And I blame, culture and the way that we have been raised in the system to just be followers. But we are capable. We are capable.
Communications and public relations expert from South Africa, Linda Mzapi. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Thank you.
All right, bye. Now, quotes they say are messages from the people before us to help us do better in the future. Right now, I'll be taking you through some quotes. Please take a look. The youth in Africa are diverse in realities and skill set. They have the ability to provide the resolutions to challenges plaguing the continent. And through their unwavering resilience, their vibrancy and penchant for innovation, young people, by virtue of their energy, their vibe and adaptability, gravitate to the forefront of creating new solutions to old problems. And African governments must leverage this natural affinity through building their capacity and also providing spaces for them to thrive. It's been a beautiful debut episode. According to Desmond Tutu, it's now that you can be whatever you want to be. My name is Blessings Mosugu. Once again, it's the debut episode of Fafanua Afrika. See you again, same time, same station next week. Till then, bye.